Presented at the G20 summit in New Delhi in September 2023, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor was a far-sighted, potentially transformative product of the new regional thinking generated by the Abraham Accords. And then barely a month later, in October 2023, October 7th happened, and a framework of regional cooperation in which Israel would play a central role suddenly became more complicated. Now, a year and a half after it was announced, and with Middle East hostilities waning, there's increasing focus here, in the Gulf and in the Levant, and in Europe, on putting the pieces in place to make IMEC a reality. And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next half hour. How would you describe, I'm going to ask you to begin, Dr. Singh, how would you describe the current status of the project, especially after Prime Minister Modi's recent meetings with President Trump in Washington, and also after the higher visibility that we're seeing now in official contact between the UAE and Israel? The Israeli foreign minister was recently in the UAE. We had a UAE delegation that was recently in Israel. It seems to be more possible now to talk about that relationship that has been on track since 2020, but was maintaining a much lower visibility after the Israel-Hamas war.
Before discussing what happened after, Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US, I would like to say that, today, if you look at it, I mean, of course, the 20th century was the century of geopolitics, but the 21st century is the century of the geoeconomics. And it has become so important, geoeconomics has become so important that it is now a cliche, rather, right? So in that context, if you look at IMEC, it is truly a multilateral, a multi-sectoral, and a multi-stakeholder kind of a framework corridor, right? So in that sense, if you look at, of course, there were certain hurdles from, September 23 up until now, but the progress is not that slow. Because before the meeting between the American president and the Indian Prime Minister, there were many other things that had taken place. For instance, in March last year, India and UAE had already, signed an agreement, a framework agreement, intergovernmental framework agreement was already running between the two countries. And then by June, you see that India had formed a, Indo-Mediterranean Initiative, IMI, with the Mediterranean countries, including Italy, Greece, and other nations. So that was also, a very big deal for the countries to come forward and, to cooperate on these agreements. The third thing that happened was that IMEC has been repeatedly mentioned since November of last year in the Mediterranean dialogue, and now, in intellectual domains, also in intellectual talks also, whether it was in Kochi dialogue, whether it was in, Indian Ocean dialogue, or recently between the President of America and India. Now, the meeting this February is very important because now it is showing that there is, some concerted efforts being taken between the nations, between the partners, and it is going to be a reality, as you also pointed out rightly, that it is going to be a reality because now they are talking about the investments. Now they are talking about the $600 billion investments that is going to go in this, in framing of this corridor. And they're also talking about taking IMEC beyond Europe. I mean, if you look at President Trump's address, he says that from Italy, it will be connected to US as well. So already there's some sign of IMEC plus happening between the two countries. So these are the developments that are already taking place. And of course, like I already said, that it is a multi-regional, stakeholder, multi-sectoral kind of a framework. So obviously there will be some time, in terms of bringing everyone together. In silos, everybody is working. Like I said, that India is working with the Mediterranean countries, India is working with Israel, India is working along with, the Gulf partners. But if you look at in a concerted format, that a steering committee, a Sherpa level dialogue is yet to happen. So I think by this year or by next year, we'll see that everybody will come together and there will be a concerted effort from all these stakeholders, all the partners, and they will form a steering committee.
Thank you. I'd like to ask our other panelists to jump in to this as well. First, with you, Ambassador Malka. From the Israeli perspective, there's a lot of attention now being focused on IMEC. How does it look to you?
We can't hear over here.
You couldn't hear what I was saying. I'm sorry. Really, there's new attention being focused on IMEC, a great deal of excitement in Israel about the possibilities that would exist with Israel's role in IMEC. After a year and a half of war between Israel and Hamas, lower visibility being paid to the possibility of Israel being a participant in this, things are starting to change. We're seeing a great deal more attention focused on the possibilities for Israel for this greater engagement now with India and actually serving as really the hub of this connection between the Far East and Europe, and
yes.
South Asia and Europe.
Thank you. Thank you for this question. Yes, Israel sees itself as the gateway of the East to the West. And as you mentioned, this war that started in October 7th, 23, really changed the situation, and we needed just to wait to see how things calm down and let the dust sink. But now, and especially after President Trump has announced again this corridor, and since we understand that this corridor between East and West is very, very important, crucial for the world, for sustainability, for, of course, efficiency, and to make more peace and ease tensions in the region. And now understanding that after the war, the visibility of this project is this visionary project to really to materialize is much higher. And therefore we think that now, if we just, as Dr. Manjari said, just align the stakeholders together, and make the plan, because we're still in the planning stage, make the right plan, build the right structure of incentives, understand what each stakeholder can gain and what he needs to bring to the table, understand who are the opponents, those that see threats in this new corridor, and to ease the tension, to give them comfort, to understand what they need. And in the end of the day, in order for this very big and visionary project to be really implemented, it has to be under a partnership between the public and the private sector. We are talking about a very big scale investments. And for that, we will need to, the private sector and the public sector to collaborate, to work together. And of course, a project like this that is border crossing and collaboration between different countries along this corridor will ease many tensions. We know that countries that have joint economic projects are they're less likelihood that they will come to conflict. They will try to ease the tensions, to compromise, and of course we see it as a great opportunity to the world to become. And I think that the relations between India, Israel, and of course the United States are a key factor for the success of this project. I can tell you that in India, of course, Adani Group that I represent in Israel saw this a few years ago, understood the value of this chain, of this route. This is why they came and bought Haifa Port, which is owned now by Indians, by Adani, and understand the importance of this route, and of course have the vision that it will be viable and bring so much prosperity to the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Seivers, I can call you Mark because we're AJC colleagues. You convened a discussion on IMEC in Abu Dhabi just a couple of months ago. From where you're sitting, and I should say as a former longtime Foreign Service officer of the United States, both the Emirati and I should say Gulf perspective on IMEC, but also the American perspective on IMEC, why is it important to both the United States and the Gulf that this project move forward?
Thanks, Jason. I think it's a long-standing interest of the United States to see stability and economic prosperity spread throughout the Middle East. And the current situation is that the Gulf states are in very strong leadership positions for the Arab world and for the Middle East. And the United Arab Emirates has through the Abraham Accords, a formal relationship with Israel that's was perhaps frozen a bit in place during the first year or so of the Gaza war and the war in Lebanon, but now is coming back to much more normal status, and people are looking forward to what may come next. I think it's very interesting that President Trump, in his meeting with Prime Minister Modi, the two of them specifically focused on IMEC for part of their discussions, and that further developing it is a stated goal of both countries, and in our partnership bilaterally with India, to tie India more strongly to the Gulf, and through the Gulf to Israel, and from Israel to Europe, but now linking the United States more directly into that network of trade and energy and information and all of the benefits that may flow from developing the project is very, very exciting. Of course, it has to be a public-private partnership. Much of the investment will likely be done by the private sector, but the regulatory frameworks and the multilateral agreement networks that are necessary to make it happen can only be done through governments. So both have to be part of this process.
Let me stay with you for a second, Marc. You served as the charge d'affaires in Cairo, number 2 in the U.S. Embassy in Egypt. There's an Egyptian angle on IMEC, and I would think an Egyptian concern about IMEC because of the Suez Canal traffic that might be reduced because of that. Is that something that we ought to factor into this?
I think Egypt has a genuine interest in this and has some concerns, but I also think there are potential to bring Egypt into this. The IMEC trajectory that's planned goes through India by sea to Jebel Ali in the UAE, by rail through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel to Haifa Port, and then to some destination in Europe that's still under discussion. But there's the potential, once it's established, to have other linkages, other routes that are included, including Egypt is certainly a possibility. Some people have also discussed the possibility of some sort of compensation for Egypt's interests. I'm not sure that's necessary, but Egypt should be part of the discussion. And, you know, Egypt has somehow managed to largely tolerate the Houthi blockage of the Red Sea over the last year and a half, something that I find inexplicable. So they can adapt to this, but there should be some way to bring Egypt into these discussions.
Very good. Dr. Singh, I wonder if I could ask you just for some basic facts about IMEC, if you could just talk a little bit about the nature of the project, the extent of the project, the possibility of expanding the project beyond India to Europe by way of the Gulf and Israel and Jordan.
I would like to start with, Egypt. So if you look at it, Egypt as of now is not part of IMEC. But if you look at Egypt, and especially after the, Houthi attacks, because it is one country which is controlling the Suez Canal. And by virtue of controlling the Suez Canal, it had a lot of pressure on its revenues. There was a lot of pressure on its, expenditure in safeguarding the canal for attacks. So if you look at from that perspective, I mean, it was estimated that around 40 to 60% of its revenues, there was a slump in the revenues after the Houthi attacks. And if you look at it, about 50% of the military spending in Egypt goes for acquisition to kind of safeguard the canal. So it is this kind of, pressure on one country is, unimaginable. It is too much for a country to handle. So in that context, if you look at this particular project, the IMEC, because there are multiple actors, there are multiple countries involved, and because there are multiple sectors, the PPP is also involved, so there is a sharing of the burden. So because of that sharing of the burden, it is a more, viable option in the coming times. And also because there are multiple actors involved in IMEC, it also kind of gives it a security, because, whether we like it or not, in the coming times, whenever it gets operationalized, it is going to be a strategic asset for most of the countries and for the world for that matter, if it expands beyond, if it rather expands to the east as well. Because if you look at the Southeast Asian countries, like Singapore, like, South Korea, they are also interested. They are also watching what is happening in IMEC, right? So in that context, if it becomes a global infrastructure development project, so in that context, what is going to happen is that it will need a lot of security. So in that, the very nature of, providing security to the corridor, the alignment of these countries coming together, and if you look at it, it is an alignment of developing and developed world. It is not just, one global north and global south kind of situation. So all these countries coming together and building a, a network like this, I think it's going to be, it's going to be a very profitable asset for everyone involved in this infrastructure project.
So let me pick up on that a little bit. Ambassador Malka, back to you. The aspect of IMEC that really involves kind of global power competition between the global south and the rest of the world, between the east and the west. How does IMEC fit into this equation? Belt and Road Initiative of China. I know Turkey has a plan for what, Iraq Development Road Project. How will IMEC change India's kind of economic potential to project its wealth and its investment and its engagement with Europe, as opposed to the Belt and Road Initiative, for instance? How will it change the regional power dynamic?
Well, first of all, that the world economy is based on trade routes. And IMEC aims to provide a new, modern, alternative trade route between East and West. So it opens another alternative. An alternative brings value. For this to happen, of course, we need to see that, the question you asked before that about Egypt is exactly a shining example how we can ease tensions, maybe also with Turkey, but let's start with Egypt. Egypt is concerned that it might lose cargo and transportation to the IMEC. But if you look at the scales and you think how many, for example, containers you can ship from the Gulf to Haifa and to Europe on train, it's hundreds, not more than hundreds. One mega ship can carry 21,000 containers. One mega ship that will go. So it's not a real competition for Egypt. Once we talk about this, we can ease many of the tensions and the concerns. I think the same goes about Turkey and other countries that are now our opponents to this corridor. Once they will understand the value, the contribution, because IMEC is not only about transportation and trade. IMEC is about energy, green energy, about sustainability, is about communication, about technology. Think about Israel, the startup nation, how much technology can be brought to the table to this corridor, which all the countries, all the stakeholders can enjoy and benefit from. So it's much more information, as Ambassador Marc has just mentioned. So IMEC is much more than this. Once other countries around will understand the value of IMEC for the world sustainability, I think they will less resist. They will come to the table and they will contribute their, what they can bring added value, and of course will enjoy from the benefits. Because we can look at IMEC as a big economic project. So we're talking about risk sharing, partnership between public and private sectors, also about risk sharing. And like every other projects, those that will step in the first stage will benefit more because their assets all over the corridor are now have less value than what they will have as much as we advance with this corridor. Once they understand that and realize that, they will step in earlier stages, which will bring more likelihood for this project to become a real and in a reasonable time.
Let me stay with you, Ambassador Malka, and then also ask Ambassador Seivers to jump in. This project will require a great deal of international cooperation. Goods and services, not services, goods and energy and energy and fuel, communications, traveling from country to country to country to country. There are tax implications, there are regulatory implications. Political considerations could play in from time to time and maybe disrupt this process. How did you insulate IMEC from political disruption caused by external factors? Wars, conflicts, competition, pressure from outside forces, the United States, Russia, China. How can you protect this enormously valuable asset moving forward in the face of all of these possibly competing claims and concerns?
I think this is a major question about the sustainability of the project itself. I don't think you can totally isolate any project from these political tensions and, of course, different interests. But if you will create it in that manner, that the value for the stakeholders will be in such a scale that they will have so much to lose, it will create the sustainability for the continuity of this project. And this is exactly the structure of incentives that I talked about earlier, and what is the value that each stakeholder can get. As much as this value is high, they will have so much to lose, the forces, the vectors to preserve this project will be stronger, and then we can overcome. And we saw when there is a big value, a big economic benefit, we'll find the solutions, the options to solve many, many tensions that would have not been solved otherwise. So let's create this value. Let's make it that there's too much to lose, so we will overcome any political issues that will come in the future.
Ambassador Seivers, you have a similar level of confidence as Ambassador Malka?
I have a lot of confidence, always tempered by some skepticism, but I think the potential is so large that it should overcome the political concerns. The instability of the Middle East remains a factor. The potential for further conflagration is always there. It's not been, those issues have not gone away. But certainly this ties in very nicely with the U.S. desire to see the normalization of Saudi Arabia's relations with Israel. A big piece of this project going forward has to go through Saudi Arabia, and perhaps with Saudi Arabia's blessing, it will be easier for Jordan to become part of this, and it ties in very, very nicely in a kind of virtuous circle with the idea of normalized Saudi-Israeli relations. So I think if you bring those political factors in here, it is a further incentive to parties to come together around this concept of an India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor that has to have as its fundamental elements the agreement of all the state parties being stakeholders in the process. So I think these are mutually reinforcing.
Marc, let me just stay with you also. That there were terrorist acts in the Sinai to break the gas line between Egypt and Israel. How do you, not just in the terms of political protection, against terrorist protection that needs to be put in place with this sensitive project? There are rail lines, there are cables that could be disrupted and broken by terrorist actions. How can the countries work together to prevent that kind of disruption in this project?
Well, it will require cooperation among all the stakeholders. Just to cite the example of the gas pipeline through the Sinai, after the fall of Mubarak and during the period of Muslim Brotherhood rule in Egypt, there were multiple attacks, small explosive devices put on the pipeline, the gas pipeline connecting Egypt and Israel. To the extent that the Egyptians at one point withdrew from the agreement that they had with Israel to supply a certain amount of natural gas. They were sued by Israel over the economic loss. Some kind of settlement was reached. But when President Sisi came back into power, and Egypt reasserted state control of the Sinai, somehow those disruptions seem to have gone away. So I think Egypt had the capacity to protect the pipeline. I think during a period of chaos and loss of state control over its own major assets, then it all became disrupted. But once the choice was made to exercise effective control of Sinai and the capacity returned, they were able to do so. So I think it is doable. It will just take some effort.
Thank you. Dr. Singh, back to you. You're an expert on India-Gulf relations. Fit IMEC into the context of the relationship that's growing and that is so vital to, frankly, both sides between India and the states of the Gulf, in particular the UAE.
So if you look at IMEC and if you look at all the partners, especially the Gulf partners, they were mostly oil economies in the past, but now they are trying to diversify themselves in terms of, not only in terms of energy, but also in terms of food security. I mean, if you look at it, 90% of the food is imported from outside in the Gulf countries. So in that context, if you look at this corridor, so it provides you freight, food, and energy, all three, and plus more, digital communication, all kinds of communications which can, be built through this corridor. So that is what it is important for the region, that they want to have a food security as well, because if you look at it, most of the land is deserted. So they cannot grow food as that much. And we have also seen that, in the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine war, which used to be the food bowl of the world, the food supply to the region got severely affected. So I think both the countries have realized, both India and the Gulf partners have realized that these are the grey rhino events. Food, energy, these are the things that are going to be affected in the past, if not addressed in the present. So in that context, the IMEC corridor provides a very viable option to, it is a addition to whatever is happening between the Gulf and India. Of course, there are multi-dimensional areas wherein, trade is happening at one side, people-to-people contact is also there, there is energy, all of that is there. But a corridor building will provide that kind of sustainability in terms of these areas as well. So in that way, it complements the relationship between Gulf and India.
Very good. Let me stay with you for a second, Dr. Singh. About a year or so, I believe, before the announcement of IMEC, there was the announcement of I2U2, India, Israel, the United States, the UAE. How does IMEC fit into that? I've heard less about I2U2, frankly, recently, and I'm wondering if we can see that coming back online in a much more important way. And also, if you could say a word about whether this IMEC proposal will either deflect from or lower the ambitions for the Chabahar project in Iran and the cooperation between India and Iran, because perhaps IMEC corridor makes it less important that India have that access to other parts of the world.
That's true, but if you look at it, Chabahar is already operational, some part of it, right? So in that context, and IMEC is going to take some time. It's not going to happen, just tomorrow. It will take its own time, right? So in that context, Chabahar is going to be, important to India, and also because it gives a different connect to the Europe. It goes through Central Asia, so it gives India the opportunity to also connect with the Central Asian market. So that's a different route altogether. So of course, it is complementing the IMEC, not necessarily being, Chabahar is not going to be, not so important for India in the coming time. So it stays. On the other hand, if you look at the, the I2U2 you had talked about, I2U2 was happened after the Abraham Accord was signed between the Gulf countries, some of the Gulf countries and Israel, a normalization. So in that context, it was one of the first steps wherein India was also trying to expand beyond Gulf and bring the Gulf and Mediterranean together. So that was the first concerted effort in that in that line. IMEC is beyond that, right? So first you connect with the region and then you go beyond the region. So it is kind of complementary again. So it's not going to be, a competition. It is going to be complementary in that.
Excellent. Dr. Singh, thank you. Ambassador Seivers, Ambassador Malka, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you, Jason. And thanks to our organizers.
Thanks so much.